The reaction to the assassination of a healthcare executive says something about life in America right now. We're just not sure what, but maybe by the end of this episode, we'll be closer to understanding it. Ravi has a lot of theories about what the Democrats should do now. He's going to lay a few of them out, and I'll tell him and you what I think. Welcome back to the podcast for the 54% of Americans who regularly vote for progress in every election and want to convince their friends and family members to join our majority. This is Majority 54.
All right, Jason. Well, I think our audience is familiar at this point with this murder of the United CEO in New York that happened. It was actually 2 blocks away from where my dad lives that this thing happened. And they caught the young man who did it in Pennsylvania. Let's just go to a clip that I think summarizes roughly where we are right now.
We're learning Mangione considered the killing to be a symbolic takedown of United Healthcare over perceived corruption and, quote, power games, according to a confidential assessment of the crime described to ABC News by the NYPD Intelligence Bureau. According to the criminal complaint presented in court on this Tuesday, officers found a 3D printed pistol and black silencer. Mangione faces charges in Pennsylvania for having a ghost gun. Mangione has a number of ties to the Bay Area. ABC News has confirmed with police sources that his mother filed a missing person report in San Francisco.
Okay, so I'll just start by saying I tweeted something that I didn't think was very controversial this week, but it's come back. People are so angry at me. But, as Dave Chappelle once said, it's okay to get dragged on Twitter because Twitter's not a real place. But I did touch a nerve when I said something along the lines of that it was misplaced to celebrate this assassin. And people are it ranges from like F you and people assuming I voted for Trump because I said that to people who are like, well, what would you know about it? You served in Afghanistan. You've killed lots of innocent people. It's interesting, the reaction I've gotten to that. So
yeah, I've got a lot of, I haven't done the whole Twitter thing on this, but I've read, some of the posts people have put out there. I've also read a lot of long form pieces that track what I'm hearing from otherwise reasonable people in my life who almost everybody says some equivalent of murder is bad, but and there's a but here in a way that I don't know how many times I've heard a but after that sentence in American life. And it's prompted me to think, well, what's going on here? And I think clearly people are very frustrated with our healthcare system. And something we've talked a lot about here, certainly talked a lot about it on the Lost Debate, probably done a dozen episodes last year just on the healthcare system and what's wrong with it. And we'll circle back to that. But I do want to start with a trend that goes beyond the healthcare component of this, which is it seems to me that we have entered a phase in which Americans are getting increasingly comfortable with political violence, which is if you in any way are sympathetic to this act, then you're bordering on endorsement of political violence, right? And we can talk about whether political violence has a place in certain, parts of life. Like if you're in Iran, for example, trying to overthrow the regime, then one could say political violence perhaps has a place, right? But here's the trends I'm picking up on. People who are sympathetic on either side of the aisle of this act because of what it would say or do for healthcare reform, right? Or capitalism generally. So that's clearly in the realm of political violence. The Daniel Penny situation in New York, where this man was just acquitted by a jury after strangling an unarmed person on the subway, who was. Jason, are you having an issue with my mic? I'm seeing a
yeah, I don't think your mic is on, but let's finish the segment, and then when we go to a break, you can fix it.
Oh, okay, cool.
Because I can hear you fine. It's just you just sound like Zoom.
Oh, I see. I just changed it. Hopefully that helped. Yeah, hopefully this works. Can you hear me, Jason?
Yeah, I can hear you fine. Just keep going. You're good. We'll fix it when we get to a break.
So I think the Daniel Penny situation in New York, where a man strangled somebody on the subway who was unarmed. I mean, there's a lot of context there we don't have to go into here about whether the person he strangled presented a threat to others on the subway. You had obviously January 6th. You had Kyle Rittenhouse. You had the riots of 2020 around the country. And I don't think these all track a certain way, right? Not all of these are right wing or left wing. We spent a lot of time on January 6th and Rittenhouse, but if I'm being honest, I saw a lot of justification for violence in 2020, and I see a lot of my left wing friends justifying this. And so the question
also, anecdotally, I'm sure we both have people in our lives who said things. They may not have put it on the internet, but said things after the Trump assassination attempt that were bothersome.
Right. I've certainly heard that. So I think this is a new phase in American life. And I think people on the left, have found comfort in criticizing January 6th for the abomination that it was. But I think one thing that worries me deeply is that this problem, which is I firmly have believed is uniquely bad in Trump circles, seems to be more widespread than we've probably been giving credit.
Yeah, I can't decide, and I don't know if it matters, whether it's a new phase in American life or it is sort of a return to a phase we've been through before, right? I mean, you think about the late 60s, think there were a rash of assassinations then. You go to, the early part of this country. I mean, statistically, the most dangerous job, the highest fatality rate for any job in the United States is president of the United States. So we've been through this sort of thing before. And as far as the idea of, and I only mention that to say, it doesn't mean that we are irreparably into a new phase of American life. It doesn't mean necessarily that we've crossed a Rubicon that that once you're past it, there's no point of return. But then the other thought I have about this is that you're right that it has seemed to be more prevalent on the American right. And so I don't know if this means that it is now also on the American left, or if it is I don't know if this matters, or if it's sort of like there's this sense on the American left of like, well, if this is what we're doing, sort of like being dragged along by one side or the other. But either way, you find yourself there potentially.
Yeah, my feeling is it's been there. I think this is a tick different. Like, I certainly saw it in 2020. Like, I got in tons of debates with people when, on my corner, there were people vandalizing convenience stores and jewelry stores owned by immigrants. And some of these people who were vandalizing them, I knew personally as people who were pretty well off and were doing it for some kind of symbolism that never lasted beyond that brief moment in time. So there's this sense that, oh, hey, we're like, we're here to show our support for Black Lives Matter or whatever. But like many things in life, and I suspect the pushback against our healthcare system by some of the people who are justifying this violence, it's a bit scattershot and without any long-term follow-through. And there is this clip from Chris Cuomo, who I don't normally bring to this podcast, from News Nation, which is certainly not an entity I often bring to this podcast, where he basically makes this point and probably a bit more sharper. Let's go to this clip.
The message he hissed should be heard. Healthcare so expensive, so easily denied that it offends people's lived experience with oppressive health insurance. But how would he know? He had a bad back and a surgery, but there's no reason to believe he was left broke or broken by a horror story with an insurance company. His lived experience was making money off healthcare. His family owned nursing homes that made them rich. 7-figure donations to hospitals paid for him to go to the Ivy League, to live in Hawaii, to create his best life. My point is not to diminish the outrage about healthcare, or even to diminish him, but to source where what we're seeing with him comes from. You see, this guy is part of a problem that is harder to fix than healthcare or any corporate issue. he is proof of a new fundamentalism, appropriated oppression. In this case, the anger of those who get done dirty by big health insurers. And he's not alone.
I'm not sure what I think about this idea of appropriated oppression. Like, it's because if you remove from this scenario the fact that he committed murder, which we're very against, he committed political violence and murder. If you take that out of it and you imagine that he just was protesting, or he was, demonstrating in some very aggressive way, then you could have said appropriated oppression would apply to people who, for instance, marched with Dr. King, who went from the North to the South. So, I think I end up in the same place as Cuomo on this, which is I don't have any sympathy for this guy, the assassin. I do think it is entirely wrong and the wrong way to do things. I don't side with anybody who is saying, like, oh, come on, like, this guy was responsible for a lot of deaths. Like, okay, but that's not what our laws say. and so my point being here, like, but I can't go so far as to say, because you have not experienced the oppression, absent this situation, and because you haven't experienced the oppression, that you have no right to speak up for it. Because the whole concept of protest is, like, you try to get allies, you try to build a coalition that includes people outside your lived experience. So maybe I'm misunderstanding what Cuomo's saying.
Well, here's a thought about this, which is what in what world do you want to live in if you're sympathetic to this act, right? Where do we stop? Right? It's not just the healthcare system. It's certainly not just the insurance companies. I've done many explainers on how when you're looking for villains in the healthcare system, the insurance companies, though bad, are not at the top of my list, at least. I would probably start with the hospital corporations, the nursing homes, which incidentally is how his family made all the money that they made. Like, these are entities that in part are overcharging and causing a lot of the issues that we see today. There's a great book by Stephen Brill called The Bitter Pill, in which he goes through the charge masters at the hospitals and how they're ripping off everybody, including the insurance companies, right? We could talk about the pharmaceutical companies. We could talk about politicians, right? So you can go through this and say there are a lot of bad actors. And I think there was this Anthem anesthesiology issue that came out like right before and after this attempted assassination attempt that I think illustrates this. So Anthem came out and said, this was right before the assassination attempt, that they were going to like cap the amount of
the assassination. Like
assassination, sorry. Yeah. They said they were going to cap the amount of time that they were going to reimburse for anesthesiology, right? There's a great Vox explainer about this, but essentially what was going on was that providers were just overcharging everybody for anesthesiology, and like basically, at least according to this Vox article, which is a fairly they're not like the people who are going to be like siding usually with big healthcare, but basically their argument, which tracks what Brill was writing about in The Bitter Pill, is that these providers will find any way to run up the charges, right? So what Anthem was saying was, look, we're going to give you some hoops to go through if you want to have extended anesthesiology, because in almost no circumstances is the amount of anesthesiology that you're billing us for appropriate in almost any circumstance. And we're not saying it's a blanket no, it just means that you're going to have to go through some hoops before you start charging us for this kind of stuff, which if you run a capitalistic healthcare system, which is the one that we have, inevitably there are going to be these moments where somebody has to try to figure out how to cap their costs in some way, form, or another. Now, I'm for single payer and for some form of universal public health care so that nobody is at the mercy of this system, right? But the system that we have right now means that doctors, nurses, office managers, hospital corporations, even nonprofit hospital corporations, pharmaceutical companies, insurance companies, even your employers at times are in the position of saying no. So do you believe that in any of these circumstances that violence is acceptable or excusable? Or are you sympathetic to that? Does that mean that my dad, who's a doctor, should be gunned down on the street for refusing to pay out of pocket for healthcare, or my mom who's a nurse in nursing homes her whole life, or this gentleman, the assassin, his parents who run nursing homes, which I don't know anything about their nursing homes, but having spent a lot of time in nursing homes that my mom worked at, are often not the greatest places in the world, and certainly are containing costs every step of the way. Like, you could spend an unlimited amount of money per patient in nursing homes, right? And then if we move to a public system, like in Canada or the UK, where there are lines where people are refused treatment or have to wait 6 months sometimes for a treatment, that sometimes, depending on what your insurance is in the US, you get faster, that we should be gunning down those people, right? Like, what is the answer here, right? Or extend it to pharma, factory farming, to Wall Street, to whatever, your landlord, right? Like, at what point do we say everybody could just issue vigilante justice? And what is the standard for exacting that justice? Like, what proof do you need? What culpability do we need in order to go after these people? Is a shareholder in these companies also liable? Are you a shareholder? Do you even know you're a shareholder? Like, have you looked at your 401k? Like, so this is where I think people, really need to examine where we are right now, because if you start to excuse violence against this one guy, then you need to ask yourself, where does it stop?
Yeah, I totally agree. And I want to be clear, because there's people listening to this and watching this right now who are like, these guys are so out of touch. We are not spending a lot of time right now giving voice to the anger that's out there about the way health insurance works in this country and the way healthcare works in this country. And the reason for that, I think, is because I think people already know how you and I feel about it. And I mean, I hope they do. Like, the other day, after I said that I was against murder, somebody said, well, where were you in the past, like, being against, the violence that's perpetrated by the healthcare system? And they're like, have you ever made phone calls on behalf of, a campaign? And so I just responded with, here's a link to an article about me running for president on a platform of Medicare for all. Like, is that sufficient activism? I was, this is me in Iowa in 2017, getting ready to run in 2020, talking about Medicare for all. My point here is, I know how I feel about it. I know how you feel about it. I am sufficiently outraged at the way healthcare works in this country. But I'm not going to murder people over it, because we have as you pointed out, when you look at the healthcare system, yes, the way health insurance works is disgusting. And it's not just elections. We have a civil justice system. If there are things that have been done to make health insurance companies pay out properly over time, I promise you it's been done by trial lawyers in courts far more often than it's been done by Congress. That avenue still exists. I'm not saying it's sufficient, but that avenue still exists. On top of that, as you pointed out, it's not just health insurance. It's the fact that providers often, they own not just the doctor's office, but they will also own the MRI center, and they will also own the surgery center, and they're getting that kind of vertical integration. So then they're overbilling as a result. And then you have insurance companies layering in pharmacy benefit managers and then buying pharmacies. It's all gross. And it's why you and I are for Medicare for all, or a single payer system that puts the government in a position to negotiate. You can still have private insurance. It can still be part of the system, but it should be an option, and it should negotiate on behalf of all of us. All that said, you're not going to get that by assassinating CEOs. When I was in Jefferson City as a legislator and as Secretary of State, I would always look around and I would see politicians who would not really do much to pass campaign finance reform or ethics reform, but then they would go home to their districts and they would rail against lobbyists. And it's interesting. I was the lead proponent of campaign reform and ethics reform during my time in state politics. And you will be hard pressed to find something where I say that being a lobbyist is in and of itself unethical. Now, I ran a Senate campaign where I said that my opponent's family being lobbyists was a conflict of interest, but I never said that it was wrong for people to be lobbyists, because I understood that a system had been created and that the fault for that system lay at the feet of the people who created the system, not always the people who acted within the system. So Brian Thompson, the late now, the slain CEO of United Healthcare, you can make whatever ethical judgment you want to get about the guy, but he didn't create the system. If you want, that's when I said online that I thought the anger was, or that the support for this kid was misplaced. It's because support people who are advocates on the Hill, people who are suing insurance companies. Those are the heroes. But somebody who thinks they're going to make a difference by assassinating a person who is working in a job that, like it or not, we have made entirely legal in this country, that makes no sense to me. And I do think it's wrong. And it makes me really, really nervous about what direction we're heading.
Yeah, and here's the thing. Like, this is not a let's spend 30 minutes to mourn one CEO of a healthcare company. That's not what this is. This is because there's a lot of people who die every single day, including, yes, people pointed out, because they're being refused healthcare in this country. What we're talking about is an internal conversation amongst our movement, where I think it's really important to lay down a marker that supporting vigilante justice. I promise you, listener, you will not regret having a hard line on vigilante justice, especially where this country is going. Like, you're going to want a clean shirt on this one. Like, when the Rittenhouse stuff happens, or the January 6th stuff happens, or whatever, Daniel Penny on the subway, you're going to want a clean ethical code when it comes to vigilante justice. And mine is, as screwed up as this country is, I still believe in courts, in elections, and a ladder of options. Everything from electing the right person, to pestering the right person, to divesting yourself, to pushing people in your life to divest, to protesting, right? Like, for all the people who are outraged online, anybody with means, which is not everybody, could have done the same thing this guy did and just shouted this guy down on the street instead of shooting him on the street, right? And I'm sure that happens, right? Now, if somebody were to post and say, look, I've done that a million times and I've lost 2 family members who refused treatment, etc., like, that's a person who has a right to be really frustrated. And like, I think that goes beyond vigilante justice. That's just somebody who legitimately is asking for answers about what they should do. I suspect that a lot of the people who are posting online and giving you hell are
Ravi, those people still don't commit murder.
Right. It wasn't in this case, right?
Yeah.
Like in that, like, I'm sure there are people who've tried. The case that we're talking about, at least as we know right now, is not that guy. And actually, what we have is a guy who has lived most of his life of privilege because of profits of the very system he's talking about. And like, so it's like, I'm sorry, this is not Mahatma Gandhi to me. Like, I'm not going to fall victim to this bullshit hagiography of this guy, right? We can and have been having conversations about healthcare. Like, I can't even, like, look, podcasts are not activism, but it is a reflection of my time. And every candidate from Howard Dean to Barack Obama to Lauren Underwood to, all these candidates that I've supported personally over the years, by and large, have been advocating for a fair system, and in many cases, a sweepingly more fair system. And my personal politics are single payer, universal healthcare option, so that there's like, nobody is below the level of Medicaid in this country. Like, everybody should at least have that option in this country. That's the world I fight for, right? But I don't fight for it with a ghost gun in New York City against a guy that I don't know, who's just one of many people in the system. Like,
And if you want to hold perpetrators accountable, like, I mean, I'll give you an example of perpetrators of the system. Like, when I was in the legislature, I got an amendment to create more healthcare for kids passed by doing an amendment to the budget that said that we were going to take state legislators' state-funded healthcare away until they added more kids to healthcare. And I got Republicans had to vote for it because, and they had to add kids to healthcare because of it. Like, I'm not saying like, look at me. I'm saying, well, That's the sort of thing, because the perpetrators of the system as it exists are elected officials, right? It's that, and I'm not saying go commit violence against them. I'm saying, like, when people act as they are expected to act within how the system allows them to, you don't get to kill them and think that it's going to change anything, because it's not. Because there are plenty of people online saying, well, look, it's already created changes. No, it has not created changes. And if anything, what's going to happen is it's going to create sympathy for leaders of health insurance, of the health insurance industry. I mean, look, this dude probably has some serious mental health issues, and I don't see him as any different than a school shooter. Look, he shot somebody who I ideologically disagree with. That doesn't change the fact that he's a murderer. And it doesn't change the fact that we have a totally unjust health system. I promise you, it won't change that fact. And it doesn't change the work that we all have to do to put in to change that. So you and I decided to talk about this because I think we are both not just upset by people's reaction to this, but I think more importantly, we are upset by the increasing appetite and really tolerance for political violence on both the right and the left. And that's not something you mess around with.
Yeah, and people will listen to that and be like, it's both sides. I'm sorry. Like, go back and watch the clips from 2020. Like, I'm not making up that there was excused violence. I saw it with my own eyes, and I saw it across this country. And you could read tweet after tweet where people say this, right? Violence is the tool of the oppressed was one of the most quoted tweets out there on the left during that period of time, right? Now, who was the oppressed and who was the oppressor, right? I saw it with Bangladeshi cops getting punched in the face on the streets of New York by white kids from Williamsburg, right? I'm sorry, that's like a complicated picture to me. And I could tell you right now, where did we get, what did that get us, right? So when Chris Cuomo, a very flawed guy, is mocking you because you have a little bit of a, shaky ideological ground and certainly some issues with follow through and consistency. Look, you could shoot the messenger, highly flawed messenger, but you might want to pay attention to the message. That's the lesson of the past election is like, look, get out of your bubble. This is wrong. You can't control what the right does in January 6th and all that. And we have spent insane amounts of time on January 6th. Like, and I don't apologize for it. I'll spend more time on it when he pardons them, which he inevitably will. We probably have spent collectively 20 hours on this podcast critiquing that, and probably 30 minutes on 2020. So it's not a both sides thing, but you can't ignore this stuff. Like, you have to, I learned this with my family history in India with Gandhi. My grandfather joined Gandhi's movement, which they had every reason to be violent. They were product of an imperialist system that was killing people. And Gandhi's decision, as MLK's was in this country and Mandela's in South Africa, which was a little bit more complicated and mixed there, was that you embrace nonviolence, because the minute you start embracing violence and you start crossing ethical boundaries in the name of your cause, you then turn around and you don't have a cause left. You're like, well, what are we fighting for? What is the principle we're fighting for anymore? And so this is why we spend time on this, not because I think this one guy deserves more attention than any other person who dies in this country unjustly, but because of the sheer volume of bad arguments that people who probably listen to this podcast are hearing, and some of you might even be pushing.
All right. We're going to take a break because at some point we should probably try and talk about something that causes people to keep listening to us. The last few weeks, I mean, you and I have delighted in being like, you know what? Let's push our listeners a little and make them think. Let's not just give them what they want all the time. But so we're two things when we come back. One, I think Christopher Wray, the FBI director, just announced that he's resigning. So we can talk about that.
Oh my God.
And then we're going to get into the different theories that you have about where the Democrats should go from here. So with that said, let's sell some stuff. Here you go. Are you interested in having hair that grows faster, stronger, and longer, having visibly thicker volume, experiencing noticeably less shedding? All of this is possible with Nutrafol. Nutrafol is the #1 dermatologist-recommended hair growth supplement brand trusted by over 1 million people. See thicker, stronger, faster-growing hair with less shedding in just 3 to 6 months with Nutrafol. Nutrafol supports healthy hair growth from within by targeting key root causes of thinning. stress, hormones, aging, nutrition, lifestyle, and metabolism through whole body health. While many supplements rely solely on ingredient studies, Nutrafol clinically tests final formulations to ensure their efficacy. In a clinical study, 72% of men saw more scalp coverage after taking Nutrafol men's hair growth supplement for 6 months, and 86% of women saw improved hair growth after taking Nutrafol women's hair growth supplement for 6 months. With a Nutrafol subscription, building a hair growth routine is simple. Purchase online, no prescription required. Automated deliveries and free shipping keep you on track. Plus, you can save up to 20%. You'll have access to free naturopathic doctor consults, and a Headspace membership is included. Get results you can run your fingers through. For a limited time, Nutrafol is offering our listeners $10 off your first month subscription and free shipping when you go to Nutrafol.com and enter the promo code MAJORITY. Find out why over 4,500 healthcare professionals and stylists recommend Nutrafol for healthier hair. Nutrafol.com, spelled Nutrafol.com, promo code majority. That's Nutrafol.com, promo code majority. Let's be honest, what most people really want for the holidays is to see their favorite people more often. That's why this year, the best gift you can give, besides plane tickets, is an Aura digital picture frame. Named the #1 digital photo frame by Wirecutter, Aura frames are incredibly smart and easy to use, allowing you to upload unlimited photos and videos directly from your phone to the frame. Plus, you can order the frame online and preload it with photos and videos using the Aura app, so it's ready to go right out of the box. We have one. We had fun with it by letting the kids select the photos, so we kind of all sat down as a family and picked the photos, and it was like a very nice, fun experience. Save on the perfect gift by visiting auraframes.com to get $35 off Aura's best-selling Carver mat frames by using promo code MAJORITY54 at checkout. That's auraframes.com, promo code MAJORITY54. This deal is exclusive to listeners, so get yours now in time for the holidays. Terms and conditions apply.
Golden Nugget Online Casino invites you to turn the cold gold. Transform your winter moments into winning ones with all of your favorite slots like Icy Wilds and more, plus other casino games. And now you can enjoy special seasonal rewards all winter long. Whether you're spinning reels or doubling down, make this a season to celebrate. New players use code MAJORITY and have your first deposit matched up to $1,000 in casino bonus funds. Just opt in and make a minimum deposit of just $5 or more today on Golden Nugget Online Casino and complete the playthrough requirement. Make any moment gold. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER. Please play responsibly. 21 plus. Physically present in Michigan, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, and West Virginia only. Void in Ontario. 1 per new customer. Receive deposit match on your first deposit after opt-in up to $1,000 in non-withdrawable casino bonus funds that require 10-time playthrough within 7 days at different contribution rates on select games. Terms at goldennuggetcasino.com/welcome. All right, Christopher Wray.
Yeah, I guess he just announced, like in sort of a town hall at the FBI, he gathered everybody and said, hey, I'm going to leave before the next administration starts. And I guess what he's saying is he doesn't want to drag the FBI deeper into, because so for people who don't know, FBI directors are appointed to a 10-year term, but presidents nominate them. Presidents can also fire them. So they have a 10-year term, but the president can fire them during that 10 years. And so Ray is saying, look, I'm going to get fired, but he also doesn't want to be in a, I don't know why the thing did a thumb. I'm not in favor of Ray getting fired, but my screen did a thumbs up anyway. But I think what he's saying is he doesn't want to drag the FBI deeper into it. I think it also might be possible, and this isn't, no judgment against him, that he may figure, I'm going to get fired anyway, rather than put myself in a more vulnerable position to be prosecuted. Why don't I do something that looks like an olive branch by resigning? That could be it as well. But what I don't understand is they're saying that it paves the way for Patel to be the FBI director. I guess maybe that's true if this means that Trump could put in an interim director, but I don't think so. I think that the director has to be confirmed by the Senate. So I believe Kash Patel is still in the same position regardless, right?
He still has to get confirmed unless they do one of these like recess appointments. But I think that gives him a limited window,
Yeah. So unless there's something I'm missing, this doesn't feel terrifically unexpected, and it doesn't feel like it changes the trajectory of where things are going. We know Trump wants to have somebody who answers only to Trump and will exact retribution on his behalf, both at the FBI and at the DOJ. We know that's what he wants. He's going to want that whether Christopher Wray resigned or didn't resign. And so, I don't know. Am I missing something, Ravi? I don't think this changes the trajectory of that.
No, I mean, we're going to have to follow it, but it's like not the greatest sign, though, I have to say. Like, because keeping him on board was the best defense against Kash Patel, because there would have to be a firing, and that in and of itself, firing the guy that you picked would create its own dust up. But now there's going to have to be somebody, right?
That's a good point. It does open the door for Trump to say, hey, we need an FBI director, so hurry up and confirm the one I've nominated. I think that is true. It also should be, people should be reminded, like when you talk to people in your life about this, that Christopher Wray was appointed by Trump. This is not like a Biden or Obama appointee who hung around and, was trying to be some sort of partisan. He was appointed by Trump to replace James Comey. And then he just did his job. He didn't go after Trump, especially because he was Trump. He just did what the FBI director is supposed to do, which is follow the evidence. And obviously that's not what Trump is looking for. So it is concerning.
Well, that is not the greatest of news. Well, okay. You and I talked on the phone about how to spend this time. And I was thinking, you and I, when we talk on the phone, we're always kicking around different theories. And so I was like, you know what? I think every now and then we should empty the notebook and I should just throw out some theories to you about, and you framed it as like what the party should do differently, but they're really just observations about where we are right now, less like prescriptive on what we should do. So here are some half-baked sort of theories about where we are right now. And theory number one is that Democrats are now the more conservative party, and Republicans are somewhat more the liberal party. And what I mean by this is traditionally in American life, at least in our lifetime, the Republicans are all about preserving the status quo and fighting change, like dramatic change, right? And this really traces back to the 60s, right? Where like the 60s was a countercultural revolution against the sort of stodgy, staid ways of the 50s, right? The post-World War II environment. Well, it seems like we're now Democrats trying to conserve institutions, whether it's public education, our universities, the FBI, right? As we just talked about. We're generally more supportive of the international world order, NATO, free trade. We're against tariffs, right? That is where we are right now. That is not where we've always been. Like when you and I were in college, the critiques of NATO, NAFTA, World Trade Organization, the FBI, the intelligence, all of this were coming from the Democrats, right? For the most part, it was more prominent there. Now the Republicans, they want tariffs. They're critical of foreign intervention for the most part. They want radical change. They talk like they have the Make America Healthy Again, RFK Jr. type stuff, which really is a creature of a certain pocket of the left, the crunchy left, and the certain pockets of the right kind of uniting. And so my theory is this is where we are now, and in part this could change the way that we talk to the electorate.
It's interesting because what you're not saying, although people may be hearing it right now, so it needs to be clarified, what you're not saying is that Republicans are now the left and Democrats are now the right, because ideologically, there's still consistency, right? Democrats still want what we just talked about, universal health care. Democrats still want unions to have a lot more power. So still very pro, like ideologically, it's still very pro-worker. It's still very pro-average or low-income American. Still want things like, like for lack of a better way of explaining it, affirmative action at universities. Like those are all still very democratic ideas. Your point is you're not talking about the policies or ideologies that are tied to the words progressive or liberal or conservative. You're talking about small c conservatism, which is says stop changing, don't change, whereas liberal means change. And so if you think about the trajectory we were on during the Obama years and during the Biden years, maybe not as much culturally, but from a governing standpoint, it was a trajectory that was doing things that are traditionally thought of as liberal, like FDR style government spending under Biden, stuff like that. But those are things that we've done in the past, right? Those are things that that have been within the playbook of American governance. And what Trump and Republicans are pushing right now are things that have typically not been in the playbook of American governance. They are right-wing things, but your point is they represent change, whether good or bad. I mean, bad, you and I would argue, but they represent change. And so I think what you're talking about is, what do we do rhetorically with a political environment where we seem to be in an uncomfortable position that we are not accustomed to, which is arguing against change because we think that change is regressive.
Yeah, and part of it is it starts at the level of observation, and I'm not sure what to do with the observation.
Right.
It is a challenge because this environment, more than any other, is more inviting of a change candidate, right? Like, I think the 80s is like with Reagan and all that is probably the classic, Morning in America ad. Like, it felt like a very more of the same type of environment, the 50s being that too. And people were scared of change. Whereas now maybe it's the social media environment, the ADDness, and this is a global phenomenon why incumbents have been struggling for a while all over the world of any party, is that being for the status quo is not great, so that is a challenge for us, so it's more of a diagnosis than a prescription.
I think so. I've sort of two different thoughts about this. One is that I think that a lot of the consistent change election thing has to do with what I would refer to as a customer service expectation elevation in all things, right? So I did a phone call with a guy earlier today he's like trying to create an app for local government services, and he just had asked me if I would spend 30 minutes like answering some questions for his research, and I said sure. And one of the things he asked me is, what do people want from local government? And I said what they want is to not have to think about local government. They want their community to be safe. They'd like their schools to be good, and after those things, they'd like their trash to be picked up on time, and way after that, they'd like there to be like amenities like parks, recreation, stuff like that. I said, but the thing is, the reason that it's getting harder and harder to deliver those things for people is because we live in a day and age where I can take my phone here and it can occur to me, you know what? I need a new toaster, and I can open my phone. I can either just talk to my phone, or I can type in something, and then like literally by touching my thumb or have different people text different ways, but touching my thumb to my phone 3 times, I will within 24 hours have a toaster on my front doorstep. And that's what everyday life is like in America right now. Even if you are living in poverty, you can go online and you can and you wait 3 days longer and you get a toaster that is not as good, but it still shows up and you don't have to leave your house. And then at the same time, people see our government, whether it's run by the left or the right, people see massive dysfunction in different ways or another, whether it's the right because you got Louis DeJoy as Postmaster General and now your mail doesn't come as fast, or you have, or you watched in 2021, in August of 2021, us leave a country we'd been at war with and all sorts of chaos ensue with Afghanistan, right? Or you go back to COVID, whatever it is. So I think part of that is that people across the world, particularly in America, particularly in the developed world, are living in a bath of convenience, even when they don't have means. Things are more convenient on average than they were in the past. And so it just seems like, why is that not happening at the governing level? And no one's meeting that standard. And so you constantly have a change. And then I think the example of what you and I are talking about the idea that small c conservative, small l liberal, or small p progressive, that they're not tied to policy beliefs necessarily, is if you look at the education debate in America, where you and I are actually largely on different sides of that. It's one of the few issues where you and I are like you're very much like live in the school choice world or like charter school world, and I am less so. But I have had many conversations with people I've been allies with, like in the teachers unions, where they have said, why are we losing more and more Democratic politicians to the charter school movement? And I've said, because the nature of your argument is one that is unnatural for Democratic politicians and activists to inhabit, which is a small c conservative position. It is a position that says, don't change it. And if people are dissatisfied with the system, and you are in the position of making an argument of don't change it. Now, you may be right, because your argument may be don't change it the way you want to change it, because it'll make things worse. And that's true in many different respects in American life. But if your argument comes across first and foremost as don't change it, well, then you come across, rightfully or wrongfully, as the conservative in that argument. And that is difficult to know how to navigate.
Yeah. And I also think part of it is like a resistance to talk about change too. Like I was listening to Derek Thompson's podcast this past week, where he examined the issue of fluoride and was like, what would it look like to take seriously the arguments people make about fluoride? It was a really interesting exercise. And what happened was he talked about, well, what makes somebody even believe what RFK Jr. is saying on fluoride? And he went through it. He was like, here's what the data says. And he was like, there are certain elements of the data set that are probably important to acknowledge. And then he was like, but after talking through it all, it seems obvious that the cost-benefit analysis is strongly in favor of keeping fluoride in the water. Now, but he said, this is not how we tend to talk about these things. We tend to be the hall monitor Democrats. We're like, anytime anybody brings up a critique of the way things are, we ridicule them automatically, instead of having like a nimbleness to like, oh yeah, okay, you want to change the way we approve drugs in this country? Let me hear you out. Like, what's wrong with the system, right? Like, there's this guy Balaji who works for Andreessen Horowitz, who's like, he has like what I view as fairly radical ideas that I don't endorse about like how the FDA approves drugs, right? But when he's en route to getting somewhere I'm not ready to go yet, he makes some really good points about what's wrong with the system. And I think it's important for us to not be the people who are always just like, no, public education is just something that we protect, instead of saying, well, tell me what's wrong with it that you'd want to change. Or the healthcare system and the way that our food system works is inherently corrupted and yada, yada, yada. Like maybe they'll talk about GMOs, and I'm not there on GMOs. I've never seen any evidence to validate what they say about that, but maybe they'll talk about, the sheer amount of microplastics that are in all of the different utensils we use, et cetera. I'm like, well, yeah, I mean, there are people making interesting points about that. Like, you know what I'm saying? It's like, we need to be a little bit nimble when people are talking about change, as opposed to being the people who are always resistant to it. Okay, let's go through a couple more theories, because we could run out of time. I'm going to jump to one that I think is a little bit more provocative, which is that the next nominee for the Democrats needs to be somebody who runs against the Democratic Party and establishment. What do I mean by this? The brand of the party is a bit in trouble right now, right? And often the most successful candidates run against their party. Bernie Sanders, Trump, Obama in his own way in 2008, Reagan, McCain, Bill Clinton. Now, not all of those people won the nomination, but most of them did. And Trump is a good example of this in many ways. Like, there are many things we would not want to replicate about Trump, but when Trump comes on the scene, the Republican Party brand is in a really bad place. And what his running against the party, if you remember when he ran in the primary, what it allowed him to do was say, look, when you talk about all these things you hate about Republicans, I'm not that. Now, in the end, you and I both believe he was a lot of that, and then a lot of other even worse things. But he ran in a way that gave him and everybody who wanted to support him permission structure to be like, you know what, I don't normally support Republicans, but this person is different. And I think our next nominee should take that posture.
It's interesting because there's two ways to do this. One is, and something has to be consistent to both of them. If you're going to take that posture, you have to genuinely believe that posture. Between social media and all the access that we get to people at this point, like if it's inauthentic, it's going to come across. So, like with Trump, it's like, I don't know what, I don't even know how to use the Trump example, because he seemed very inauthentic to a lot of us, but not inauthentic to others. So you have to, and you can't just be like, I'm going to go pick something I can run against the party on. Like, you have to be running against the establishment without a bias, whether it's the Democratic or Republican establishment. That's the only way. And that's kind of what Trump held himself out to be doing in 16 and in 20, is all through. That's kind of been his posture. But it's going to be very difficult for an upstart candidate who doesn't have a massive movement behind them to do that. It's why, Bernie had a movement, but it wasn't a big enough movement to upset that establishment. Obama's movement came along at a time where it was palatable enough to the establishment that it worked. And also he really created a very large movement, and it was built on opposition to the Iraq War and things like that. Trump was just a massive celebrity, so he came in with his own brand. So interestingly, if you're going to do something like that, it feels like that candidate would potentially have to be somebody who is bigger than the politics and comes out of the popular culture. Almost like a Mark Cuban, I can't believe I'm going to say this, but The Rock. I'm not saying that these people should run for president. I'm just saying, or you have to be somebody who can, in an Obama way, create a movement like that with the pure power of your personality and your charisma and your leadership, which I do think we have some people like that. I think Wes Moore could be that sort of a person. I think Ruben Gallego could. I think there are people like that.
Well, okay, let me give you my third one. There are more, but we'll save these for another day. And this one is that Democrats are just becoming too risk averse. Like, there's like a cookie cutter way of thinking about things. And there are a couple of things that have happened recently that made me think about how predictable we are. And predictable is bad, because when we're in this attention economy, people just know what we're going to say, and our people sound very soundbitey and platitudinal. So it's just it starts with the way people talk, but it goes beyond that. I've been thinking a lot about this RFK situation, which I think was a very important turning point in this election, because I actually think there were a lot of people in his corner who Trump won over for a lot of reasons, but in part because Trump was a little bit more susceptible, like he was a little bit more open to even having the conversation. I think it's clear to me that both Harris and Trump thought RFK was a bit of a quack.
Yeah.
But I think
Trump was just more transactional.
He was more transactional about it. And I think for
about
us,
everything, right?
We got to realize that, I hope it's clear to anybody listening to this that I am very much not on board with most of what RFK has to say, and certainly not on board with his process. But we're a coalition at this point, right? And part of it is we've now got Trump and RFK, right? We could have had Harris and RFK, and we need to start just rolling the dice more and be like, you know what? That represents a few percent. We can't afford to give up a few percent. Mm-hmm. So let's bring you in. The Rogan thing was an example of this, going on Rogan and unconventional venues and, just letting it fly. Having a primary late in the game, as messy as that would have captured the attention of the public, but also given us an opportunity to perhaps look under the hood and even consider unconventional candidates, right? I think that we're in this ordered risk averse scenario. And I also think it's a particularly bad place to be when we're the underdogs, which we've been the entirety of this cycle. Because it's like when a team, it's sports, right? When this is the David versus Goliath, Malcolm Gladwell stuff, right? Whenever you're playing somebody who has an advantage over you, you want to be the one to mix things up. You want to be the one who changes the rules of the game. And where we found ourselves was, interestingly, Trump was the one constantly chaotically going about his business, and he was the one who was the risk taker throughout this campaign, and we were the ones who were clinging to the conventional strategies. And I think it should have been exactly the opposite.
And a lot of that is the result of us being risk averse and not even risk averse ideologically intolerant, which is not just because we have a very big coalition demographically. Demographically, our coalition is much broader than the Republican coalition. But we started to rely on that so much that we became ideologically, we shrunk the tent. When I got into the legislature, and look, I'm pro-choice. I've never been anything but pro-choice, and I've been very out front, and look, let me say all the disclaimers. I've never entertained anything that was anything other than that. But when I got into the state legislature, I got elected in 2008. There were a lot of rural Democrats, to the point where, it was a pretty close margin. The Republicans had been in power for a few years in the legislature, but like we would win some votes because we had a lot of rural Democrats. Almost every one of those rural Democrats had one thing in common, and it's what allowed them to continue to get elected during those years. They were all anti-choice. Every one of them was against abortion rights. They were with us on pretty much everything else. They were with us on unions. They were with us on all that stuff. We never had any trouble getting along with those folks because, usually when somebody's with you on 97% of things, you would consider yourselves to be in agreement. Today, in the Missouri State Legislature, there are no anti-choice Democrats. And there are, with the exception of Stephen Weber, who is a pro-choice Democrat, no Democrats who represent areas other than like Springfield, Columbia, Kansas City, or St. Louis. And in fact, there are no state senators at all who represent any areas other than Kansas City and St. Louis. Stephen Weber is the only state senator that's not from Kansas City or St. Louis who's a Democrat. And he is pro-choice, but he's the only one. And those two things go together, is my point, is that I'm not saying more Democrats should change. Like, I always prefer everybody to agree with me on every issue. But ideologically, we have to broaden the tent, and we have to say to people, and we've already done this, we just act like we haven't. People celebrate, rightfully, Adam Kinzinger. They celebrate Liz Cheney. They celebrate those people. But if either of them were to become Democratic candidates, I'm not saying they should win the primary necessarily. You can vote on that in the primary if you like. But if they do, like, why would we say they don't count as Democrats if they end up agreeing with us on most things? And that's my point here, is that Trump and the Republicans, because they are very transactional, they decided, look at the way they talked about abortion in this election. They didn't stick to their guns that they supposedly believed in, that abortion should be illegal everywhere. They very quickly pivoted to a place that gave a permission slip to voters to do things like they did in Missouri and other states, which is go to the polls, vote against abortion bans in their state, and then vote for Republican candidates, because those candidates have said, hey, whatever the law is in our state, that I'm good with that. I'm not going to do it, And I'm not saying we should be soft on abortion. We shouldn't. But I'm saying we should want more people in our party who don't agree with us on 100% of things.
Yeah, and I think it's a tricky and important balance to be to stand up for those rights while also inviting people in who don't agree with you on that issue. And I think a listener might be confused as to how those two things are different. And we could spend more time on it, but it's long been the history of our party when we had by far a better situation than we have today, right? Like, we had plenty of pro-life, as they call themselves, Democrats at times when the protections under Roe were much stronger than they are today. So you need to remember that. It's not about the ultimate outcome. It's about how do you build a coalition, right? And coalitions are ultimately about having a bigger tent. And in parliamentary systems, it's a little easier because there are just different parties and you're just like, well, what do we agree on? Like, we agree on these one things, but we're going to disagree on these other things. And that's why we call ourselves different parties. Unfortunately, that doesn't really exist in this country. But it's kind of what Trump has done with the RFK people, right? He's like, that basically is a different party. It's like a different species politically, but he has integrated them into whatever it means to be part of the MAGA movement. And we don't need to do it that way. But my point on this sort of idea is that we just need to be less risk averse generally, and a lot of these different things, and realize that we are in a different planet now. We can't be running these stodgy, rally-driven campaigns where we're doing the network news and we sound the same that we sounded 8 years ago, and we repeat the same lines over and over again, and we cast out anything that seems chaotic and weird, right? We have to embrace a little bit of chaotic energy here, I think.
My rule is, if you hold your position authentically and you agree with me on a bunch of other stuff, and the majority of other things, then I will view us to be largely in agreement. Doesn't mean that you and I aren't going to argue over the thing we disagree about. Doesn't mean that I'm not going to vote differently than you on those things. And if I have a choice of a candidate who agrees with me on all of the things, I will vote for that candidate. But I'm not going to excommunicate you from the movement. And we just happen to use abortion as an example, but there's so many. Because here's the thing: when you're in a time of political realignment, if you are willing to bring people into your coalition who don't agree with you on everything, it forces the other party to also broaden their tent. And then you know what you get? You get more genuine debates in this country. I'm on the board of Giffords. I'm very in favor of gun safety stuff. I speak out about it a lot. And yet I know people in my life who I've converted to voting for Democrats, who the one issue they have not come along my way on is guns.
Tim Walz was one of them when he was a member of Congress.
Well, I'm not even talking about politicians. I'm talking about voters, right? I'm talking about like I have friends who are still I disagree with the Democrats entirely on guns, but I have convinced them to vote for Democrats, right? What good would it do if I were like, no, you need to be all the way there or you're not one of us? It wouldn't do any good. But here's the larger point I'm making is that if we invite more people into the party who disagree with us on these things, it forces the other party to invite more people who disagree with them on their major issues, which creates more room for debate in this country. It is a problem that our party is almost unilaterally the party that's in favor of gun control of any kind in this country. It used to be that guns and abortion were two examples of issues that you couldn't necessarily know for sure where a candidate stood on that by what letter was next to their name. And at least on guns, what did that result in? A lot more gun safety legislation in the 80s and 90s. Because you would have somebody like Bernie Sanders at the time, who represented Vermont. A lot of people had moved to Vermont because they wanted to hunt, they wanted to do things like that. He was a socialist who was, I believe, endorsed or at least supported often by the NRA. Now, my problem is I don't know if Bernie Sanders really believed those things, and that would be my rubric, is if I think you're doing it to pander, I'm a lot less interested in it.
Right.
But if you have genuinely hold this belief, I will view you as somebody who I haven't convinced of that thing yet, but who I am largely in agreement with. And look at Congress right now. Are there any anti-choice Democrats? I'm not saying there should be, but I know that there are now pro-choice Republicans, which means they are putting themselves in a position to win over those voters who are not sure or who are up for grabs despite their position on that. Which means we are not being ideologically tolerant enough of people who will vote with us without agreeing with us on everything.
Right. Well, I'll keep throwing out theories out there, and they're half formed. So keep that in mind, listeners, and send us messages. We'll elevate your theories too.
Yeah. Save some for next week.
I'll save some for next week. One for us. What's happening in your world?
Let's see. Diana's traveling right now, so I'm doing we went through a long period where, because Diana, what she does, the majority of what she does for a living, in addition to writing books and consulting, is she's as you know, a very highly sought out keynote speaker. And we just went through a period, and we're sort of still in it, where there's just not a lot of major events that go on around the holidays. So she's been home, and I've been kind of spoiled by it. There was a time, the majority of our adult life, where I was the one doing all the traveling and she was at home, and that's really flipped. And it was just really nice having her at home. One, I love my wife and I love hanging out with her. And also, we have 2 kids, and man-to-man defense is a lot easier than zone. And so that's why, I haven't shaved. It's just, it's reminded me how grateful I am for my wife and how excited I am for her to finish this trip, and we get a few more weeks straight of nobody traveling.
I like that defense metaphor. I've never heard that before. It's funny.
Your turn. I know you have a big thing, but I don't know if you can share it.
Oh, I think I can. I'd been working on this nonfiction book, and with your cousin's help, and we just got a massive offer from a division of Penguin Random House to publish it. That was wildly beyond anything I thought was possible in this space. So I'm really pumped about that. And, that comes as I've got my novel coming out probably in March, which we'll talk about here with a different publisher. But yeah, man, it'd probably be 2 books in 2 years after never writing any book. So I guess I'm a writer now, I could say confidently. But that was really exciting. So yeah, that's the big news this week.
Hugely exciting. I got to talk to my cousin Sam about it, and he is as shocked as you are, but happily so. And no, I'm really excited for you. You know what I think would be fun at some point, because both you and I separately have collaborated with my cousin Samuel Ashworth, who is an incredible writer on projects. But other than a very short-lived thing that didn't end up. We didn't end up finishing together. The 3 of us have never worked together. It would be fun sometime as like a special episode that probably only the audio people will care about, if we were to have Sam on here and have him talk about the difference in working with you and working with me, or maybe
I think we should have him on. Well, he has his novel coming out.
Oh yeah.
So that'll probably be a good time for that, so he could promote his book, which is really awesome.
That's a good idea.
And so yeah, that would be great. Because it will be different. You and I were talking about this the other day. We have very different styles of. You said I'm more like your wife in the way that I. I enjoy terrorizing him in a way that I can't imagine, based on what I know about you, you would enjoy. But I enjoy getting a rise out of him.
But my wife does win, because she is also. We should have her on, because she has collaborated with Sam, and I think has terrorized him. This will be one of those times where I say we can say all this because Sam doesn't listen to our show. And then sometimes I say that and nothing happens. And sometimes I say that and then I get a text from Sam a few days later where he's like, I do listen to the show. So
I don't think he's going to get to this. We'll see. If he does, then congratulations. This will be an Easter egg for him.
We're pretty deep into the show.
Yeah.
We're 67 minutes in. I mean, you have to really hang in there for it. So nobody text Sam about it.
Yeah.
It'll be just a fun experiment. So, all right, everybody. Thank you to the audience for tolerating Ravi and I's decision to explore some things other than just sort of serving up things that are going to make you feel good all the time, which we haven't generally always done, but the last few weeks it's very much been like a let's be provocative with the audience, and let's get them thinking. And some of you have liked that and some of you haven't, so thanks if you're still hanging in there. We appreciate it. So thank you to the Midas Mighty. Remember, we all have a platform. Make sure to use yours today.